Hello, guys, and welcome to the Heritage Agendas Football Podcast. Today it's just myself, Ibrahim, and this is episode number 40. And we know it's been quite a while since we recorded the last episode, and kind of with the World Cup turning around the corner, what better time to make a return? Really, the next three episodes are going to be dedicated to analyzing the 48 teams that have made the tournament. We're going to split this into three main sections, so this episode will be for groups A through D. Episode number 2 will be for E through H, and then the third episode will be for I through L. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, in the background, kind of some of my commentary and analysis is going to be supplemented by a dashboard, which I will talk through kind of as we walk through each of these various teams. We'll predict where we think the teams will finish in their respective groups. And then the last episode will have a small section at the end kind of dedicated to, based on those predictions, how do we feel the knockout round would play? Who do we think will be some of the teams that we feel can win the tournament, between myself and then obviously Abdisala when he's back on the podcast. So, tournament, 7 days away. It'll be 1 week from the time of recording on the night of the 4th. And really that first team that we want to talk about, they opened the tournament, of course. It's one of the three hosts. All three will be covered in this episode, and that's Mexico. And Mexico last tournament really disappointing overall. Didn't make it out of their group after a lot of consecutive eliminations in the round of 16. I think this time around it's going to be a little bit different. Obviously, they have a lot more talent, I think, than 4 years ago with Raul Jimenez being back in the mix, and obviously they had the Saudi League top scorer, Julian Quinones, and of course, really one of the biggest talents in all of world football, in Gilberto Mora. So it's going to be really interesting to watch him, just 17 years old, and already attracting, interest from the likes of Real Madrid, Obviously, they opened the tournament against South Africa. They did not have a qualifying round, but really in some of their more recent friendlies, it's been pretty impressive. So, a tie against Portugal. They won the Gold Cup last summer, and wins against Ghana and Australia as their last two friendlies at the time of recording. Obviously, this time, they're going to want to make it past that round of 16. It feels like that's been the stopping point, but I think a really good opportunity to start on a high note. They obviously opened the tournament against South Africa, which we will jump right into. So South Africa, really one of the teams that has been going under the radar for me as I was putting together this analysis. This team is extremely attacking. I think just from the way that they utilize their wing backs to the type of formation that they play, and it's really a breath of fresh air. I think that sometimes when teams go into the tournament, they're perceived as underdogs. Obviously, this is the first time back in the World Cup since they hosted in 2010. Teams just have a tendency to sit back, kind of absorb pressure, take a late goal, and play for a 1-0 or a 1-1, especially against a stronger team. And that just does not fit the mold of how the South African team wants to play. They want to attack. A little bit of question marks, in my opinion, around their defense. Obviously, they rally around their goalkeeper, Williams, who is probably the best goalkeeper playing in the African continent. And then Lyle Foster, who a lot of the viewers will be familiar with, who starts for Burnley. So I think that first game will be, obviously a must-watch. I think there'll be goals for both teams, which we didn't see in the last World Cup. But I would lean for Mexico to open up the tournament with a win, probably with a 2-1 or a 3-1. And then the other two teams in this group, and this one starts to get really interesting. Obviously, South Korea last World Cup, the late winner against Portugal to go to the round of 16 where they were beaten up by Brazil. Lot of talent in this squad. Obviously, Kim Min-jae, Lee Kang-in is an X factor, the PSG man. Hwang Hee-chan for Wolverhampton, and Sung Hyun-min, who's no longer in that kind of left wing role. He'll play a little bit of left wing, a little bit of striker. Now playing in MLS. This team did well in qualifying. One of the undefeated, the only team in Asia to do that. They've had a couple really good friendlies as of late. A 5-0 win against Trinidad and Tobago, notably in March. I would lean for this team, I think, to make it out. I think they'll be in the top two. I think that first game against Czechia is absolutely huge because if they start off with a loss and then having to play against Mexico, who are obviously going to be in Mexico for all three games, that would be a disaster on their front. And then the final of those four teams is Czechia, the Czech Republic. Couple penalty shootouts to even make it to the tournament. They had to go through the playoff round. They did not make it easy for themselves. Really difficult team to break down. They play that 3-4-2-1 formation. Patrick Schick obviously is their talisman, their best player, and then Thomas Souček, kind of an aging core overall. I would lean for Mexico and South Korea. I think will make it out directly. And I'm actually going to put Czechia in the bottom. So the order that I had was Mexico topping the group, South Korea in second, South Africa in third, and the Czech Republic in fourth and going home. Obviously, this tournament's going to be a little bit different with 8 of those 12 teams from the third place making it out to the round of 32, and not the round of 16, obviously. Group B. So Group B is a little bit more interesting. I'd say probably between the 4 teams, there's more of a gap between the 4 than in Group A. But the 4 are, of course, Canada, Bosnia and Herzegovina, who are the surprise, obviously beating Italy, which we'll get into, Qatar, and Switzerland. And so we'll start with Canada. Obviously, last World Cup, their first one that they qualified for. It's been amazing to see how much this team has changed from, being a mid-tier CONCACAF team, and then now being really one of the premier front three. I'd say they were number one in their qualifying group the last time for the 2022 World Cup, and then obviously automatically qualified as a host. Their recent form, a 0-0 draw against Ecuador, who are no slouches. We'll talk about that later. And obviously there's a ton of attacking talent. Alphonso Davies, that's the biggest question mark coming back from that hamstring injury against PSG. It's going to be all about Jonathan David, all about, Teon Buchanan getting it up and playing for those counterattacks. Obviously, Kyle Larin is someone that they lean on heavily, kind of as that back to the goal type of striker, kind of, hold up play and then teeing up some of the attacking options, whether that be a Jonathan David, as mentioned, or, Buchanan. So last World Cup out, I thought they played really, really well. They outplayed Belgium in that opening game. They played really well for the first, 20 or so minutes against Croatia before the wheels fell off. And then the last game, they weren't playing for anything. Ultimately, I think starting the tournament off against Bosnia is a huge benefit. I think there's a lot of similarities between Mexico, where they start with a very favorable matchup, I feel, in Toronto, where I think they're going to get a win. And with that, we'll transition right into Bosnia. And obviously, Bosnia, the big shock, 2 penalty shootouts. The first one on the road. In Cardiff against Wales, and then the 4-1 penalty shootout win against Italy, that controversial matchup with Bastoni getting the red card. Tons of talent, whether that's, Edin Dzeko or Amir Dedic of Benfica, or Kolasinac, the former Arsenal man. But I think they are firm underdogs in this group and in this tournament overall. I think probably some beneficiaries from being in the same group as Qatar, who will transition next into. But absolutely huge first game, and probably Bosnia will feel a favorable matchup for them as well. The third of those 4 teams is Qatar, and Qatar obviously last tournament the hosts. It's their first ever World Cup where they made it through a traditional qualifying round versus their automatic qualification. And they've been really up and down. So they won 2 consecutive Asian Cups in 2019 and then 2023. But, this team just runs through Akram Afif. So he was the 2-time Asian Player of the Year. He had 11 assists in their qualifying campaign. But they barely squeaked through. I believe it was the 4th or the 5th round. And then they won. They got second in the group of 3. With a win over the Emirates 2-1. So I think, like I said, this whole their whole World Cup is, I think, based on Akram Afif and Almoaz Ali as well, who's their talisman striker. They have a really, really premier manager in Julian Lopetegui, the former Real Madrid coach. from Spain. But ultimately, I think that they're just going to be outclassed. I think the three teams in this group have a lot more talent than they do. So shortly, when we do the predictors, I'm going to have them in last. The fourth team is Switzerland, and Switzerland really, that same core of, Kobel and, Ricardo Rodriguez and Granit Xhaka and Breel Mbolo, and they always tend to do really, really well at these tournaments. Even though this is an aging core, no more Xherdan Shaqiri, but still, ton of talent, whether that be Akanji, whether that be Xhaka, as mentioned, Jeshari, Zakaria, Jibril So, a lot of players playing in those premier European leagues. And, they were winners of their group, unbeaten, I may add, with 14 goals and only 2 conceded in 6 games. So for this group, in terms of order, I'm going to take Switzerland to top this group. I just think that they are, head and shoulders above the next best team. I'm going to take Canada as automatic qualifiers, Bosnia in third, and Qatar in fourth. All right. For Group C, so the first one without a host that we will talk about, and obviously the first one is Brazil. This is really one of those teams that come into the tournament with a ton of question marks. Obviously, Brazil, with their pedigree, with the 5 World Cups, are always going to be favorites, with Carlo Ancelotti at the helm. A lot of question marks about some of their selections in regard to their 26. And really, when you look at Brazil, their whole World Cup is based on their spine of their team, in my opinion. Whether they're going to be playing Vinicius Jr. at striker or Mateus Cunha, they obviously have Igor Thiago. No João Pedro was a really, really big surprise, I will say, in their 26. But I look at Brazil and I see, 2 fullbacks that for me raise a lot of question marks. I think that opening match against Morocco, Hakimi and Mazraoui are going to cause them a ton of problems, especially with the type of role that Vinicius plays for the Brazilian team and really for Real Madrid, with not really offering that many defensive contributions. So that's going to be a question mark. They did take Neymar. There were a lot of question marks leading up to the tournament on if he would be selected. He did get in the team, and then got injured subsequently after the selection. So we'll see if Ancelotti really has a real plan for him to play a major role in this tournament as a sub, or if he's more of a sentimental pick, or veteran leadership. Obviously, their center backs are, in my opinion, maybe the best pairing in the whole tournament. Gabriel from Arsenal has been a top 2 or 3 center back in the world, and Marquinhos is not far off that mark for PSG. And then bringing back Casemiro, I thought was a big, one of the big things that Carlo Ancelotti did really quickly after taking over. And I think he provides a lot of veteran leadership. In addition with Bruno Guimaraes, who's been fantastic for Newcastle since signing there. Ton of talent on this team. I just, have a lot of question marks about the fullbacks. I think the weaknesses of the team are really poor. That number 10 spot is a huge question mark. Who's going to slot in there? Obviously, they have a ton of really, really nice young talent now with players like Endrick, with players like Ryan. But there's a lot more, players from the Brazilian league that we'll see how they do on the biggest stage. And that first game is a absolutely must watch against Morocco in MetLife, in New York / New Jersey. So I will come back to kind of where we place them, but I think there's going to be a lot of question marks. Obviously, Brazil is one of those teams that we're going to talk about a lot as we have more episodes and dive deeper into the tournament and see how they start to set up. Recently they've had a really, really good performance against Panama, where Vinicius Jr. was fantastic, and a win against Croatia as well. So we will see kind of more as this tournament plays out, how Carlo Ancelotti orients the team, especially with the type of tactics that he likes to play, so that they can kind of hide some of those weaknesses, whether that be their aging midfield or their number 10 question marks or their fullbacks. The second team is Morocco, obviously the reigning semi-finalists, the first team from Africa to ever do that, and then winning the U20 World Cup with the coach Mohamed Wahbi, who took over after Walid Regragui resigned after the AFCON loss. That obviously got a ton of question marks with how that was changed. This team for me is a really, really big question mark, and that might come as a surprise to most, because this team for sure has a ton of talent. I mentioned earlier Hakimi and Mazraoui. I think having two world class fullbacks is extremely underrated. That's a position that a lot of teams struggle at the national level. Um, Obviously, Brahim Diaz, unbelievable player for Morocco, despite what he did in that AFCON final. And obviously, like I said, no shortage for talent. Whether that's Azalawi, whether that's Boudawi, Unahi, Amrabat, Aguer, tons of talent. Bonu in goal, obviously, who's made a name for himself, both at Sevilla and then in the World Cup, and then the move to Saudi. But I just think that there's a lot of question marks with regards, especially with the coaching. Their coach resigning 3 months before the tournament. That's not something that we typically associate with their ability to succeed, but they are obviously in flying form. They blitzed through World Cup qualifying with perfect records, and then a friendly where they won 5-0 a week ago or so. But I really struggled with where this team will finish in this group, and we'll come back to it with one of the other teams. Haiti, one of the big underdogs, I'd say, in this tournament, one of the lower rated teams, number 83. It's been 50 years since they were in this tournament. They obviously qualified through CONCACAF, which that holds in and of itself a lot of questions with, in my opinion, the three best teams all having automatically been qualified. So we did see a lot of different types of teams coming in from CONCACAF this cycle. We'll see how they open up. I think opening up against Scotland, kind of repeating what we said for groups A and B, is a big plus. Where, for Mexico and for Canada, they had good opening, and another team here that's going to be in CONCACAF with a good chance really to start it off. Obviously, Wilson Isidore is one of the players that a lot of people will know from his role with Sunderland, who obviously made European football this year. Bellegarde and then and Nazon, two of their better players. But I think similar to how we had analysis for Qatar, their level of talent, in my opinion, compared to the field, just a little bit off. And then the final of those four teams is Scotland. Scotland's a really, really interesting one. Obviously, they won their group on the last day. Scott McTominay was unbelievable in that last stretch of games. A 4-2 win against Denmark, where they scored really, really late, if I remember. Losing Billy Gilmore, I think, a week or two before the tournament is a huge, monumental loss in their ability to play out from the back and really progress the ball up the field. Obviously, John McGinn, Che Adams, Scott McTominay, I think where he plays is a big question mark here. I have him at that center mid spot, but I think he really will end up playing more of like a number 10 and behind the striker, taking advantage of his ability to get forward, which is fantastic. Obviously, coming off a really good season the year before with Napoli. And then Andy Robertson and Kieran Tierney, who kind of play that left back, left wing back, center back, depending on how they set up, which is usually in a back five. It's their first time in the tournament in quite a long time, over 2 decades. But like I said, a really favorable matchup against Haiti. If they can get the ground running with 3 points and Morocco lose, that second game becomes incredibly interesting. Where if they can win or even tie, then it becomes all about goal difference for that second spot. And really, that's ultimately how I see things playing out. So I think probably to this point, the most surprising, I have Haiti finishing in 4th. I actually have Morocco finishing in 3rd, Scotland in 2nd, and Brazil in 1st. This is one of the 2nd, 3rd spots that I really wrestled with when making the analysis for this video. But I ultimately think being able to open the tournament against Haiti and then going right into that Morocco game, really they're going to, in my opinion, be playing almost with house money, where Morocco, if they don't win that opening game, if they don't take points from that opening game, against Brazil, that's absolutely devastating for their chances. If they're not able to win, it's pretty much over. And then at that point, they're fighting for 4th. So I do think that 2nd, 3rd has a really, really good chance of coming down to goal difference. So we'll see kind of where Morocco's at. And I just ultimately think there's a little bit more question marks with Morocco, even though I don't think anyone would argue that they're more talented than Scotland on paper. I just think that them losing their coach a couple of months before the tournament, in conjunction with the way that their schedule is formatted, doesn't suit them well. And then finally, the last group that we're going to talk about for this episode, kind of a little bit of a quick blitz, is this Group D group, and that's obviously the third of the third and last host, excuse me. And we'll start with the United States, and obviously there's a lot of question marks against what they'll be able to do in this tournament. I saw someone who made a really, really good point that it really feels like for Mexico and Canada, obviously they're hosting the tournament and there's an expectation that they do well, but for the United States, there's a ton of pressure just based on the size of the country, the majority of the games being here, how this has been circled in, really for almost 10 years since they got the bid, and all the talk about all this young talent that the U.S. has cultivated, all the the big name players that are now playing in Europe, whether that's a Christian Pulisic or Tim Weah or Tyler Adams, etc. There's a lot of question marks obviously around this team and how they're able to perform, and I do think that this is a really, really difficult group at the top here, and obviously it's no secret that this team runs through Christian Pulisic, and how he plays this tournament ultimately really will determine how far this team can go if he can stay healthy. They just finished a friendly against Senegal where he looked absolutely fantastic. I think there's a ton of real talent in the squad, like I mentioned, at the striker position. Having someone like a Florian Balogun and a Ricardo Pepi is absolutely fantastic. Anthony Robinson, who's been a very, very good fullback for Fulham and had a fantastic World Cup last time out. Serginho Dest, having a real proven top manager in Mauricio Pochettino, who took over obviously shortly after last World Cup, is fantastic. And then a couple of question marks obviously in the team. Berhalter getting in, Gio Reyna on his day is very, very good, but got in the squad. Despite all the controversy surrounding him at the last tournament, and players like Weston McKennie, how are they going to perform? Malik Tillman, who's been playing a pretty big role for Bayer Leverkusen. So we'll see. Obviously, they opened the tournament against Paraguay. That's a must-win in my opinion in LA. Ton of pressure that's going to be on this team, but really looking forward to that matchup against Turkey, which we will get into. The second of these four is that Paraguay team that I just mentioned. They were the last of the automatic qualifiers from South America. Obviously, Julio Enciso is a player that a lot will be familiar with, as well as Omar Alderete, who is the former Getafe and then Sunderland center back. They do have a lot of talent, whether that's Miguel Almiron, etc. Some of the players that I've mentioned. But I do think they're a little bit outclassed by the United States and Turkey in terms of talent. But really excited to see how they fare up to start the tournament. The third of those four teams is Australia. Obviously, last tournament they were a surprise second in their group before getting bounced by Argentina in the round of 16. Matt Ryan, obviously their goalkeeper. A lot of players here that play in either England or Netherlands. They do have a decent amount of talent, a lot of size, whether that's Harry Sudar, who's the Leicester center back. But I do think, like I said, similar with Paraguay, I do think that the two teams that I'll have first and second just have a lot more talent. And really the exciting team that I wanted to get into, Turkey. This is a huge opportunity for them to make a real impact on the world stage. They were a dark horse 2 Euros ago and really disappointed. Vincenzo Montella takes over, and then last Euros they absolutely hit the floor running from the opening game, and then lost ultimately in the quarterfinals against Netherlands and were up 1-0 in a really back and forth game. So they almost made a semifinal of the Euros just 2 years ago. Obviously, I think the biggest two names, Arda Güler, Kenan Yildiz, fantastic for both their respective clubs, Real Madrid and Juventus. Young, fast, really good on the ball. Having someone like Hakan Çalhanoğlu, etc., Kadioglu, is huge. They were on really, really good form. They made it through the playoffs after being second behind Spain by just 3 points. Against Kosovo, and then their last game against North Macedonia, they absolutely thrashed them 4-0. That game against the USA on the 25th is circled, like in bold on my calendar as one of the games that I just have to watch, just to see kind of how that Turkey attacking talent fares against some of the United States' attacking talent. And ultimately, I think in terms of predictions, I think that Australia are the worst team in this group, although I do think that they have a chance to finish third. I just can't see them or Paraguay finishing in that top two, barring something absolutely crazy. And then I'm actually going to take the United States to finish second and Turkey to finish first. I do think that this will be on goal difference, similar to what I said between Scotland and Morocco, but I like Turkey's chances a little bit more against Australia and Paraguay with their attacking talent that can Arda Güler playing in those half spaces, all the really, really good midfielders that they can throw at you, and I do think their midfield is just slightly better than the United States. So ultimately, I think that probably what it'll end up looking like is Turkey and the U.S. on either 5 or 7 points, and finishing first, second with Turkey a little bit ahead in goal difference. That'll conclude episode number 40. Obviously, we'll continue with 41. That will be groups E, F, G, and H. Thank you all for listening. These will be a little bit shorter episodes, in that 25, 30-minute mark. But we appreciate your time, and we'll be back soon for the next phase of groups.